Well, it's nice to see you again this week, Bill.
It's good to see you, Linda.
We very rarely have a chance to just say outright that we have breaking news.
Yeah. So it turns out the Trump administration is planning another high-profile firing of a female economist.
So what's going on?
Well, William Pulte, the head of the Federal Housing Authority and regulator of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which underwrites 70% of all U.S. home mortgages, made a criminal referral for mortgage fraud against Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. The claim is that she received two mortgages where the applications listed each property as a primary residence.
Okay, let's unpack this. First of all, who's Lisa Cook?
I met Lisa Cook 20 years ago. I met her when she interviewed for a job at my home institution in 2005. She graduated from Spelman College and earned her Ph.D. from UC Berkeley, specializing in macroeconomics and economic history. Unfortunately, she declined my institution's job offer and accepted a position at Michigan State University. But throughout an impressive career, she's been appointed to the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and later became a member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve in 2022, appointed by Joe Biden. She is the first African-American woman to serve on the board and follows Janet Yellen in that role. No Senate Republican voted for her in favor during her confirmation, characterizing her as unqualified and a left-wing extremist.
I see. I didn't know that Biden would appoint a left-wing extremist.
I think it's miraculous that he would know one, but this is nonsense. For context, the Federal Reserve, as our central bank, is responsible for controlling inflation and promoting full employment. At the end of the Biden administration, that was precisely what it was doing, contrary to the disinformation spread by Trump and his supporters in the media. Inflation caused by supply chain issues resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic was easing nicely, and we were at full employment, which is about 4% unemployment, because that's the percentage of the population that is between jobs at any given time. Now, the central bank ensures the security of our banking system. It is what we call the lender of last resort for financial institutions it regulates, and often acts in that capacity for other financial institutions during times of crisis. Basically, it bails out the banking system whenever it's necessary by providing liquidity in times of crisis. Liquidity meaning money.
This sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, we're pretty fond of it. The people appointed to the Board of Governors are usually specialists in banking and finance, trained in working as economists, bankers, and lawyers, almost always with ties to the financial services industry. Even the academics are often professors of economics and finance, but have lucrative consulting contracts with the financial service companies and banks.
So, why is it important that all of the governors are economic specialists?
Well, it's not just that they're specialists. The point is they are insiders in this industry, which makes up about 30% of our economy, an unnecessarily large part of the economy. Finance and banking are essential for providing working capital, otherwise known as money, to firms that produce goods and services. This helps them cover the costs between purchasing inputs and selling their products, for which those firms pay interest to these institutions. Investment banks underwrite, again, lending money to, firms for large investment projects, and this is funded through the sale of securities like stocks and bonds called initial public offerings, which generate fees for the investment banks. However, the investment banks often hold and trade these securities as well. Before banking and finance deregulation, this sector accounted for about 5% of total economic activity in 1980. So what is the other 25% of our economic activity in finance doing? It involves trading in securities, commodities, futures contracts, foreign currencies, and all manners of speculation in new financial instruments derived from the income flows from these traditional securities, and these are referred to as derivatives. Essentially, this is legalized gambling for rich folks, which financial service companies earn money through fees and speculation, while banks finance this nonsense by lending money to do so and charging interest and fees as well. None of this activity produces tangible goods or services and only generates high income for participants, all of which is paid for by people who do make products and provide services that are actually necessary for the community's well-being. So basically, this is a vast mechanism for redistributing real income from workers to people who gamble and their lackeys. All of this was created under the guise of making capital markets more efficient, which was bullshit. It happened because it was profitable for the financial service industry.
Well, I'm shocked, but I would like to know, what does this mean for regular people?
Well, now all the folks in this industry essentially make money from lending money. They are, in essence, bankers. Bankers hate inflation because it means the money they are getting paid for the funds they loaned you, you are now paying back with money that is worth less than the value of that same money at the time they lent it to you because of the inflation decreasing its purchasing power. Additionally, their profits come from interest, so high interest rates makes them happy, while low interest rates makes them sad. For borrowers, it's the opposite. Low interest makes them happy, and high interest rates make them sad. You can see the fundamental contradiction here.
Yes, of course, and at some point we should ask who dreamt all this up, but not today. What's different about Lisa Cook?
Well, as I said, the folks on the Board of Governors come from this industry and tend to return to it after their terms are up. Lisa Cook was not from the industry. Therefore, the financial services sector, the financial press, and the Republicans in the Senate did not support her nomination. She was confirmed by just one vote. The strange thing here is that since she isn't an insider, she was actually leaning in the direction of lowering interest rates, which is what Trump wants. But she was considering doing it because she saw signs of economic and labor market weakening, which would indicate an upcoming recession, which Trump claims is not happening. But in any case, she would likely be among the members of the board to recommend lowering interest rates in September if Trump's new stooge in charge of the Bureau of Labor Statistics doesn't mess with the employment numbers. So I guess you just can't fix stupid.
So it sounds like we're entering the surreal territory again. What was her alleged crime?
Okay, Lisa Cook took out a mortgage in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where the airport is in Michigan, in 2021, and 2 weeks later she took out a mortgage on a condominium in Atlanta, Georgia. In both applications, she claimed these would be her primary residence. The agency has made similar accusations against California Senator Adam Schiff and New York Attorney General Letitia James, and the Federal Reserve found there were 22,000 such borrowers. And for this, Donald Trump thinks she should be fired for cause, not because he cares, but because he presumably wants to appoint someone else who would be more aggressive in lowering interest rates or who is male and white. It's always so hard to tell.
Although it sounds like his usual trifecta. But is what she did wrong, actually?
Probably, but it's not entirely clear. Primary residence is a legal term used for tax and mortgage purposes. However, what you consider your primary residence and where you actually live can often differ significantly. Lisa Cook has worked at Harvard, the U.S. Treasury, the Hoover Institution at Stanford, Michigan State University, the Council of Economic Advisors, the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve since 2000, along with consulting roles worldwide. Her condominium is in Atlanta, home to Spelman College, where she has strong ties and deep affection. Spelman currently has an interim president from 2021 to present and is still searching. Even during her interview visit 20 years ago, she expressed a desire to return there someday. Now, you cannot commit fraud unintentionally. Still, you can change your mind about where you will live, especially considering your current and future job, particularly for those in political appointments and roles. The key, if there is one, is where she reported she lived on her federal and state tax returns for the relevant years. So this is likely just another accomplished woman being targeted to remove her from a position of influence and power, similar to the case of the former BLM Statistics Commissioner, Erica McIntyre. The mortgage applications are the occasion for this attack and not the actual cause.
Well, now, doesn't this, you mentioned that this all actually relates to Trump's desire to have the Federal Reserve vote to lower interest rates. So again, she would be entailed in those decisions. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And she's leaning towards lowering them.
Yes, she's part of that middle group that wanted to look at the data and make a decision in September.
Ah, so it's looking at the data that makes Trump so eager to get rid of her, or is it her skin color?
I think it's anybody who is looking at the facts and using them to make their decision with regard to these things. Trump wants two different things at the same time. He wants interest rates lowered, but he doesn't want them lowered because he's caused the economy to collapse. So it's not good enough that she would just do what he wants. He wants somebody who will go in there and articulate the same nonsensical economic arguments he's making. Now, this is the Federal Reserve Board, the lender of last resorts, the regulator of interest rates, and the bailer out of banks.
Right.
These are serious people to the financial services community. So they're not finding this particularly amusing, and they're not going to go along quietly with this because of the precedent it sets. It politicizes the Fed even more. Trump has already appointed a third person to his little group in the last month, and he would like to have a fourth. And the rationality or irrationality of the appointment doesn't matter. I don't think it mattered who they found this out about on the board. He would want to replace them and put in someone who will parrot back his particular theories about what should happen in the economy.
So this is very damaging to someone who doesn't deserve it, but does she have any recourse?
Yeah, she pretty much said she's not going to resign, and she will release her financial documents in full and answer any questions because she's a member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve and thinks that transparency is worthwhile. And I think what you're going to find is somebody who's moving around these jobs so rapidly over the same period of time probably, bought a place for one reason and then decided they were going to take a different job and bought another place. And,
So there's no actual, in terms of regulatory requirements, this shouldn't happen. But in terms of paying your taxes, does it make any difference?
Oh, yeah, because it matters where you reside, where you pay your state income tax, and,
right, okay.
and what income is taxed in those particular state income tax. It also matters with regard to licenses and, a number of different regulatory issues. But basically, we buy a house, we move someplace, if we don't like the job and we quit, we move someplace else, and that could certainly happen within 2 months. Or any other number of, Adam Schiff was a member of Congress. They have to have a residence in their district.
Yeah.
But they also have to live in Washington, D.C., and that means they have to spend 6 months and 1 day in their district, which they can't possibly do while serving in Congress. So, this has got to be happening on a regular basis for people in these kinds of political positions where residency is required in one place, but the activity takes place in another.
So what would be the absolutely perfect way to do it? Declare one place a second residence?
You can't do that.
Why not?
You can have a primary and a secondary because then everybody would be writing off their vacation homes, And you do get a lower interest rate for a primary residence than you do for a second house. Weeks between these decisions to file for the mortgages would make any difference.
I see. Well, I guess what I have is a lot of respect for a woman who's that successful, and good for her for moving so rapidly up her career ladder.
And she's done amazing work as a mentor for young economists on behalf of the American Economic Association, putting in a tremendous amount of time leading their junior scholar mentorship programs over the years.
And also, kudos to her for wanting to base her decisions on data.
Yeah. Actually, I was reading a conversation in the New York Times just before I came where they were talking to Robert Barrow and some really mainstream, Jeffrey Mankiw, and a bunch of very mainstream economists who were talking about what happens if the data is corrupted. First of all, they think it would be very difficult for the new guy at BLS to actually do anything quickly, but that they have removed all of the volunteers who supervised and served on the consulting committees for the BLS. The Trump administration has already done that, so there's much less oversight of this process, and they could begin to change it. They could begin to alter it. The economists in question who wrote these reports, editorials actually, both thought that there would be such massive whistleblowing if this happened by among the professionals who, as everybody has described them, are statistics nerds. They just want to get it right. They're sure that there would be plenty of whistleblowing. But then, people would turn to private sources for the data. There are other organizations that collect employment data, and it would undermine our confidence in what our government's telling us. This was an area where you could pretty much depend on the statistics being reported as having been collected in the way they said they were being collected.
So you've also said that this urgency about reducing interest rates, and now we know reducing them because everything's going so well.
Yeah.
That has to be part of the storytelling.
But here's the
That's not really going to do what Trump thinks it's going to do.
No. We're talking at best in September, you might see a quarter of an interest rate, of one quarter of 1% drop. And that's not going to do a great deal except signal that they're less concerned about inflation than they were. But will it actually be expansionary? I can't see how a 0.25% change in the interest rate is going to get a huge number of people to buy houses or firms to invest in this uncertainty or to employ people in this uncertain environment. I just don't see it as being expansionary. And that's not the level that Trump is asking for either. He wants them to take, 3.5% off, which would be an unprecedented drop at one time in interest rates. It would be unprecedented over a 2-year period probably to bring them down that quickly. He just wants basically zero interest rates to enhance the profitability of investments and in hopes that people will see that as a reason to invest despite the chaos he's sowing in the economy and the uncertainty that he's creating.
So he lives in the land of mystical numbers. He doesn't live in the land of how things get built and who gets hired and how money gets exchanged for salaries and goods.
Yeah, this is magical thinking. We know he engages in magical thinking, and numbers are magic numbers. You make up the ones you want. That's what you tell people. This is the guy who lies about how much money he has to move himself up the Fortune 500 list, or the Forbes list, or whichever one he obsesses on. The numbers are what he wants them to be, and that's what he wants.
Well, I take it you could tell Lisa Cook from someone she doesn't know, hang in there, you're being admired and respected from afar, and sorry this is happening to you.
There hasn't been a lot of press suggesting that this is a good policy to remove her at this point. I think we're getting the same kind of response in a more subdued way from the press. We don't have the right-wing press going crazy over this yet, and I don't think we'll see that because, again, she's not an insider in this community, and they would just as soon she really did go away. In fact, they don't want any real people on the board of governors of the Federal Reserve. Every time it happens, they start to have to put out sensible policies.
Yeah, I think at some point we should do a deep dive into the Federal Reserve and what it does and does not do well.
It does a great deal well with regard to stabilizing the banking system. In other words, they are what prevented the complete collapse of the banking system in 2008.
Right.
They were put into place and in many ways as the regulator of banking and along with a lot of banking legislation, which kept banks pretty stable from 1929 until 1973 to 1978, where they were deregulated, and then the chaos of large-scale business cycles and financial crises resumed as they had been prior to 1929.
Right. Well, as I say, I think someday we should do a deep dive into that, but keep us informed about what happens here.
Yep. Okay, so what have you been up to?
Well, I took a look at predictive policing and other scary data-driven surveillance. I started to mention this last week. Just to clarify where we are with AI legislation, the House originally approved a provision in the Big Ugly Bill to place a 10-year moratorium on the states passing any legislation to limit AI in any way. The Senate stripped that provision out by a vote of 99-1, and they did it. I know you're looking at me like they didn't, but the states really had a fit about this. But what it reveals is that the wet dream of companies developing AI, for instance, for policing, and the big player in this is Palantir Gotham, is to operate in secrecy, avoid any regulatory constraints, and deploy untested surveillance data analysis for predictive policing or any other kind of policing. The business plan is to have state and local municipalities pay for the service while stealing the data used to develop the software from social media networks, as well as using criminal records, driver's licenses, and other online information. Recently, states and municipalities have acted to restrain the use of AI, particularly with regard to predictive policing, but these efforts have been scattershot. Now, when you look at it, it is breathtaking to learn how readily municipal police departments between 2016 and 2020 utilized untested data analysis to target individuals who might commit crimes in the future. We have to be grateful to investigative journalists, public advocacy legal watchdogs, and community activists for uncovering what has often been the secret use of AI, particularly the program associated with Palantir, which is Palantir Gotham.
Now, I actually, on a similar note, I read an article in the Smithsonian just recently about the man who invented the polygraph, the lie detector.
Right.
And that within a very short period of time, after having done that, he decided it was an absolutely terrible idea because it was so undependable and stuck it in the basement and was recovered and put in the Smithsonian eventually. And it still continues to be used even though it's unreliable.
Right.
This sounds like everything old is new again here. So last time you mentioned this protective policing program in Pasco County, Florida Sheriff's Department, and it sounded like high comedy of the Three Stooges variety as it developed. So.
Yes, but there are things to learn from it and from the successful lawsuit against it. I was very flippant last week, I confess, because one example of the harassment of targeted individuals occurred when police officers showed up on a woman's front porch to inform her that she did not have a visible house number and that they could fine her for that. Such nonsensical, aggressive, and ultimately unconstitutional harassment led to those who were targeted winning a $105,000 lawsuit out of court and a promise from the sheriff never to use predictive policing programs again.
Now, this sounds like a parody of the movie Minority Report, where Tom Cruise is accused of a future murder of a man he has never met. What exactly was the sheriff's department doing in Pasco County, and why house numbers?
What's both impressive and frightening about what happened in Pasco County is how casually it was implemented and carried out in total disregard for constitutional protections, especially relating to due process and privacy. When Sheriff Chris Noko, yes, that's his name, took office in 2011, he constructed a DIY intelligence database based on arrest histories, other unspecified data, which ultimately included the grades some teenagers were getting in school, and arbitrary interpretations by police analysts. In other words, junk science. From this, the sheriff's office generated a little list, a list of names, and ordered deputies to interrogate, often multiple times, not only those on the list, but their family members.
Shades of Casablanca and bringing in the usual
Suspects, exactly. According to investigative reporting by the Tampa Bay Times in 2020, the deputies would, quote, swarm homes in the middle of the night, waking families and embarrassing people in front of their neighbors, write tickets for missing mailbox numbers, and, worse, overgrown grass, saddling residents with court dates and fines. They come again and again making arrests for any reason they can, close quote. By 2016, the predictive policing program had targeted nearly 1,000 people, and deputies had been dispatched to harass them 12,500 times. 1 in 10 were under 18, and often included records provided, as I said earlier, illegally by school districts. One deputy said the directive was, quote, to make their lives miserable until they move or sue, close quote. One deputy bragged in his performance review that his, quote, most significant work-related accomplishment, close quote, was that he assisted in getting people from 13 addresses evicted for minor code violations. I mean, these are real knuckle draggers here, Bill.
Yeah, especially when you evict the renters for the owners of the property's code violations. I like that. That's
Really,
artful.
It is artful, yes.
Did this harassment have any effect on the actual crime rate?
In 2020, the investigative reporters from the Tampa Bay Times, and kudos to them for looking into this, gave the sheriff the opportunity to comment on their findings. He claimed the policy was responsible for a significant reduction in burglaries, auto theft, and other property crimes. The Tampa Bay Times conducted, quote, a review of the same state law enforcement data and found that property crimes across the 8 largest law enforcement agencies in the Tampa Bay area had declined at similar rates, close quote, and, quote, that violent crime had increased only in the Pasco Sheriff's Office jurisdiction.
Should we be watching for the National Guard to be sent to Pasco in the Tampa Bay area?
Well, he's still the sheriff there, so yeah. Now, we know a correlation is not a cause. In fact, in all the other examples of protective policing, which I'm going to get to in a moment, there is no research to show that it has an effect on lowering the rates of criminal activity.
How did this case work its way through the courts?
Well, that gets kind of interesting, too. The lawsuit was filed by the nonprofit Institute for Justice, which is usually described as a libertarian public interest law firm. It was founded in 1991 by two former Reagan administration lawyers, Chris Bollock and William Chip Malore III, now that's a name to conjure with, who approached Charles Koch, one of the Koch brothers, I should say, for seed money because they wanted to form, quote, an aggressive right-wing public interest law firm, close quote, targeting government regulations that constrained economic liberty. The Institute for Justice received substantial report from the Koch Foundation. It is also a dues-paying member of the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, which has been described as, quote, a corporate bill mill, not referring to you, no relation to you. ALEC writes state-level legislation on behalf of corporations and works with elected officials to get the bills passed.
Okay, so this is not your usual civil liberties activist litigation here.
Absolutely not. And when they decided to litigate, the decision was that the Institute for Justice should build on their experience and base the case on property rights and Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. They recognized that other public advocacy groups would argue that while the Pasco County protective policing might well be biased in ways that promoted racial or class profiling, that bias is so systemic in our society and legal system that it is impossible to wring it out. Let that sink in for a minute. So they thought the way to stop that kind of behavior is to, quote, create bright lines that the police cannot cross. So what you say is that you cannot harass anybody in their home, close quote. The lawsuit also sought a remedy for First Amendment violations because the police harassed members of the targeted people's families, and the First Amendment protects people from being punished because of, quote, their intimate associations. So the lawsuit was filed on behalf of 4 Pasco County residents in 2021. The sheriff fought it tooth and nail. It was settled just before the trial in December 2024. And as I said a moment ago, Chris Noco is still the sheriff of Pasco County.
Now, did this case provide a precedent for other cases against protective policing, or is that why it was settled out of court?
Well, the Pasco County Sheriff's Office cooked up their own data analysis on half-baked science and their own prejudices. But other cases of preventive policing were brought against much larger police forces using the sophisticated data gathering and analysis software developed by Palantir and, as I said earlier, called Palantir Gotham. I think the Pasco County case is revelatory because of the ease with which those constitutional violations were implemented. These cases reveal the disturbing culture of secrecy involved when a police department contracts with Palantir Gotham for software targeting individuals or social networks. They also reveal the lack of evidence showing that these surveillance programs have any effect on lowering the rates of crime. Palantir wants to cloak its association with police departments because it argues the data gathering and analytics are trade secrets. The argument has not impressed the authorities who have acted to end these programs. It is also important to recall that the data Palantir gathers is, to put it simply, stolen without transparency or consent.
Now, you're saying major police departments have used Palantir for predictive policing, and yet there's no evidence that this works. So
yes,
what's going on here?
Well, the Los Angeles Police Department launched the Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration Program in 2011, or LASER. And you have to admit that strategic extraction and restoration sounds like a laser cosmetic treatment to remove unwanted hair or combat baldness. So maybe calling it laser was highly inventive. Data analytics were used to identify, quote, chronic offenders and hotspot zones. It was shut down in 2019 after an inspector general's report prompted by Los Angeles Times investigative journalism and by community activism. The inspector general criticized the program for the lack of evidence of the program's effectiveness, inconsistent implementation in the various police divisions in Los Angeles, arbitrary chronic offenders lists, which were opaque and inconsistently applied, and a lack of transparency or effective assessment. In addition, community groups argued, and the IG agreed, that the absence of legitimate validation made it impossible to rule out what they called bias amplification, which is the perpetuation of racial disparities in law enforcement. While laser targeting has stopped, the LAPD continues to use Palantir Gotham for data integration and analysis. Along the same lines, the Chicago Police Department developed a predictive model targeting individuals. A RAND report found that the program could not be shown to reduce homicides or shootings, but may have increased arrests of individuals just because their names were on the list. Chicago's Inspector General issued an advisory criticizing the use of these so-called heat lists, and the program was discontinued in 2019. The public record does not establish Palantir as having a direct role in this program, but as I will discuss, that doesn't mean they didn't, and it's widely supposed that they did. The facts are different with the New Orleans Police Department. It entered into partnership with Palantir from 2012 to 2018. This was an entirely secret program, unknown, supposedly, even to the city council. Palantir provided its services through the Mayor's Fund for New Orleans, a private nonprofit. The program created social network maps of gang members and flagged likely offenders. Defendants in gang prosecutions and their lawyers were not informed that Palantir software was used to facilitate the arrests, nor were the judges. The program ended in 2018 after The Verge, which is an online news source, investigated information provided by a whistleblower. In 2017, Wired.com, which is an online technology news platform, reported how deeply embedded Palantir Gotham was in law enforcement across the U.S., including the New York Police Department. In 2016, the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law Center filed a request under the Freedom of Information Law with the New York Police Department seeking records of predictive policing technology. The NYPD refused on the grounds it would reveal, quote, non-routine techniques and procedures, close quote, that would compromise ongoing investigations and violate the, quote, trade secret and security exemptions for vendors. In other words, it was an entirely secret operation. And it did involve Palantir. In 2017, the Brennan Center filed suit with the New York State Supreme Court, and it ordered the NYPD to release the documents requested under the Freedom of Information Act, and that confirmed the contract with Palantir.
Was there any reversal of any convictions due to arrests without, grounds?
I think in one case in New Orleans, it involved a gang of 3 people. We'll bring that in next time.
Yeah, the question of probable cause used to be important.
Yeah, and obviously in Pasco County.
Have any jurisdictions banned predictive policing practices?
Yes. As I've indicated, Los Angeles and Chicago and New York also, but then New York developed its own software, supposedly. Yes, but in addition to that, there's a broader push for what is called community control of police surveillance, which has the wonderful acronym of CCOPS. Isn't that cute? And it's spearheaded by the American Civil Liberties Union. Beginning in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump, 26 jurisdictions adopted laws to either ban outright or restrict the use of predictive policing and other abuse. And the aim of the CCOPS laws is to assure that governments and police forces should not be able to use data-driven surveillance without due process and transparency. But frankly, it isn't enough. And I think that also provides the background for the initial provision in the Big Ugly Bill that no state should be able to interfere with AI development. These people want to be able to operate without any kind of constraint or the need to prove that their software is effective.
I wasn't surprised by that provision in the bill, but I didn't connect it to predictive policing, frankly.
I don't think many of us would.
Yeah, it just seemed like, well, this is a technology and it's operated by big companies that are doing things in secret and they don't want states mucking around in it. But this seems much more sinister.
Yes, and when you consider how much the Trump administration is now giving Palantir to create databases that can be used across all federal agencies, it's especially chilling. It's a step towards a surveillance state, at the very least.
Again, another happy note.
Well, okay, all right. Let's turn to some other things then. What can you tell us about cherries this week? I think you've come across even more interesting information about the cherry harvest.
Yes, we talked about my cherry picking dilemma, which I solved by exploiting my grandchildren to get the job done quickly. Then a few weeks ago, we talked about a cherry farmer in eastern Washington who voted for Trump and was appalled that the immigrant cherry pickers who usually harvested her cherries were mysteriously absent when it was time to pick. This caused her to face large crop losses because cherries need to be picked quickly. They spoil fast, and birds and squirrels are extremely fond of them. Now, how could this have happened to her? Duh. Well, once again, in Traverse City, Michigan, where 40% of all tart cherries in the United States are grown, another Trump-supporting cherry picker lost 70% of his crop because none of the foreign workers from Guatemala who usually pick his cherries got visas.
Right.
Then the cherries spoiled because the USDA canceled the usual grants to pay for the cherries' refrigeration until they could be sent to market. Another mystery is how this could happen. So, no cherry pie this year, and the peach harvest is supposed to be underway, and maybe no apple pie or crisp or sauce or cider this fall either. We just keep winning. I cannot wait to see the price of fresh fruit in the Northeast this winter.
Yes, and from what I understand, there's only about 14% of us in this country who don't have to care about the cost of food. The rest are really facing critical decisions about nutrition. Why is the deportation of immigrants so focused on agriculture?
The bank robber Willie Sutton once said, when you ask why he robbed banks, that's where they keep the money. Well, folks, if you promise to deport 3,000 immigrants a week, you pretty much have to go where they are. And as we mentioned before, 70% of all agricultural workers are immigrants, and when harvest is taking place, they're all collected in one nice single place for you to pick them up in buses and ship them away.
That's right.
Now, I don't know where Trump voters thought he would find this many immigrants. that would be that easy to deport, maybe going door to door. Trump is doing exactly what he promised, and his voters are receiving just that, precisely what he promised and more. Rural hospitals are closing, and there's less funding for schools, mainly in red states. And now Florida and Texas are the most two financially distressed states in the country. Things just keep getting better for Trump voters, especially when you add on the decreasing employment and rising prices. The irony is clear, but that doesn't make the tragedy any less real.
And I understand that the meatpacking industry in the Midwest, especially in North Dakota, is essentially bankrupt. They can't process the meat, and Canada doesn't want it anyway. So, well done. Well played, Trump and Trump voters. What else is going on with immigration right now? It's also appalling, but is there more?
Yeah. It was reported this week that the Trump administration revoked 16,000 student visas, international students, for petty violations, but also for alleged anti-American activities and anti-Semitic behavior, primarily, though not exclusively, exercising free speech. Additionally, colleges and universities across the country are reporting that foreign students who applied and were accepted to attend this fall have been denied student visas. Now, first of all, these students generally pay full tuition and fees. Their absence likely means tuition will increase for U.S. students and their families at a time when aid for students is being cut. Second, higher education is the highest export earner of any industry in the United States, as we've reported in the past, followed by airplanes and U.S. entertainment. Since Trump's goal is supposedly to lower our trade deficit, the one thing you would not want to do is shut down your largest source of trade surplus. So once again, you just can't fix stupid.
I can add a little bit onto this. The University of Rochester also faced this because they had students who were accepted. They hadn't had their visas denied. They just couldn't get an appointment for the interview because, all the firing, but also because of anti-immigration policy. So what University of Rochester has done is set up distance learning for the courses these students were enrolled to take against such time as their visas get approved, which is really smart, economically smart, but it's also a very decent thing to do, I think.
Yes, and probably out of the reach of many of the smaller institutions in the country. The University of Rochester is a well-financed institution that can probably afford to do that.
Yeah.
And I think other large universities could step in that have these kinds of programs. But for a small place like the lovely liberal arts college that houses us, this would be quite a burden.
Yes.
And it would be hard to convince these people to pay our tuition for distance learning.
Well, it's such a ham-fisted form of destruction. And now, if I may, I would like, as the media maven, to turn to the coverage of the recent negotiations to end the war in the Ukraine.
So what have we learned about those negotiations?
Well, that's my problem. Nothing has settled down yet. There's no way to do any kind of deep analysis about what this actually means for the Ukraine. And so I'm going to talk mostly about the television coverage in the U.S. because that's the least serious. And the coverage has been, on the one hand, about the meeting in Alaska. Who won? Who was humiliated? And they don't mean what was best for Ukraine or will something good happen. No, it's did Putin play Trump? Was Trump the big loser? Should Trump feel humiliated? It's like they're talking about some kind of boxing match. And it's silly because this is not about two men who confronted each other and one was more macho than the other. This is about peace in Europe and the death of people at an alarming rate. I even saw something that really just made me nuts, and that was an interview with more than one, actually, cable network interviewed a specialist in body language who walked us through the body language from the handshake when Putin landed through their getting into the car, through their press conferences. It was completely silly because the question was, well, you know, when Trump extends his hand for a handshake, he turns his hand up, forces him into the dominant position. And then when he when he puts his hand on Putin's back to allow him to get into the car first, well, that's something you would do for a woman. So that's, again, trying to show dominance. I thought, what does this have to do with anything? And it's because they all had nothing. What is there to report? No decisions were made. No temporary agreements were arrived at. It was a nothing burger. And then when all of the heads of state of Europe showed up with Zelensky, and Zelensky had on a suit jacket, they didn't know what to make of that spectacle either. I don't think mainstream news in America, at least I will speak of television news, understands how Europeans look at what's happening. This is a major war on European soil. They've been here. They know what can happen. This is not merely a clown car. It is not for entertainment. This is not a rehearsal. I thought it was wonderful that they all showed up. I thought that was a very, very good thing to do. And the one serious interview I saw was with the ambassador from Finland, which shares a border with Russia, and he was very somber. And he says, we know what Russia wants. Russia wants to divide the West. Russia wants to undermine democracy. Russia wants to reclaim territory that it lost in the Ukraine. Well, yeah, that's what's going on. It's not about your handshake. It's not about who gets in the car first or who puts a hand on whose shoulder. And it's not about who won and who lost. It's about whether the world is losing, is on the precipice of something much more dangerous, and whether Trump's desire, his insane desire for the Nobel Peace Prize, can be channeled towards something really effective. So that's what I noticed, and I was deeply disappointed. Well, wasn't so disappointed. It's the way they usually cover things like this. It's the frame they usually put around it.
I'm surprised that there wasn't some discussion that nothing happened, and that, you know, clearly the next step would be the leadership of the Europeans coming forward, because obviously Trump has nothing to offer Putin.
Well, that's my point, that this was a spectacle. Somebody mentioned that it was like Henry VIII's Field of Gold in France when he wanted territory back from France. He'd been fighting for a long time. Henry VIII had no money, but he wanted to pretend like he did. So he built a fake city, a faux city out of, false fronts with fountains that flowed with wine. a huge entourage and a tent made of gold thread. And this was to impress the King of France so much with the power and status of England that he would capitulate. Well, that didn't work because, the king could care less. He thought it all looked very pretty, but who cares? This was the same thing. It's what I said several weeks ago. This is when spectacle becomes the state. It's as hollow as that.
Isn't Alaska a kind of unlikely place for a spectacle?
Okay, but Russia used to own it, remember?
Was he contemplating giving it back?
There were some citizens of the good state of Alaska who were saying before Putin arrived, please don't give us back.
Every week we get here and it's a new absurdity. And it's pushing everything serious we need to talk about to the periphery.
Yes. And speaking of what everybody's still talking about, the cable news especially decided that Trump taking the international stage in this way was really an effort to distract from Epstein. So they've kept putting that, chum in the water for the sharks. So, yeah, it's hit surreal. It's hit the surreal button, and it's not going to lift its finger. And so our time together has ended, and perhaps we can look forward to something more substantive and less dangerous next week. I doubt it, but perhaps.
Well, it seems that something may develop in the Ukraine, but it's not going to be at Donald Trump's initiative.
Well, this business about having guarantees.
Yeah.
And then he says, but it won't mean boots on the ground. Hello?
Yeah.
Then it means nothing, does it? I mean, please.
Till next week.
Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Nice talking to you again.
Yep.